Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Wednesday, December 11th, 2024. Time to forge ahead with today's show. There's, of course, lots going on and lots to catch up on with Greg Dworkin, who will be here in a little bit. Let me set up and make sure I have all my alarms set for all of our wonderful breaks. And yes, I'm feeling the pressure about recutting those things after like 15 years. Playing the same things over and over again. I think it's about time, and hopeful that December will afford us the opportunity to do it. Okay, let's see. Where shall we start today? Oh, I hadn't thought of starting this way, but Justice asks me a good question in our back channels. Where in the world is J.D. Vance? Yeah, that's been interesting. I guess he's the one guy who knows what his job is going to be in the next administration, and so he doesn't have to hang around Mar-a-Lago and grovel for anything. I guess that's one thing. Although, if he's smart, he probably would be doing that. There's work going on in the Senate, so I suppose he feels like he needs to show up for some of that, and he's just out of the spotlight and out of the jockeying. I guess that's what has removed him from sight. And, of course, then he'll be vice president, and he'll go even deeper underground. And we won't hear much about any of the things he's doing, and there's no room for a second ego in the Trump administration. So, yeah, that's kind of an interesting phenomenon, though. We've been watching that happen in the scramble for jobs. One of the news items, I guess among the least important, but nonetheless rose to the top of the pile somehow today thanks to social media. In the scramble for jobs in the next administration, they needed to find a job and quickly and far away for Kimberly Guilfoyle. Kim Guilfoyle, of course, of the best is yet to come fame. That's probably her most famous public moment. Her most famous private moment, of course, dating Donald Trump Jr. for many years. And in fact, becoming engaged to Donald Trump Jr. And the engagement is over. And we found out, publicly that it was over when, one, Donald Trump Jr. began getting photographed out on the town at night with a new girlfriend. And two, Kim Guilfoyle gets appointed ambassador to Greece. So good luck to Greece, I guess, that now has to deal with Kimberly Guilfoyle. Okay, well, I don't know. I guess it just wasn't meant to be or whatever. Anyway, we're done with her, and I guess the best is yet to come. Now she goes to Greece and can run around looking for billionaires in Greece, and I think they've got some. So I guess that seems to be her chief interest. But anyway, like I say, good luck to Greece. I don't really need to wish her good luck. Lots of other things happening today and much to catch up on. Also, by the way, a change in the spin is now afoot on the CEO shooting. Now that we know a little bit more about the shooter himself, Luigi Mangione. And I guess we should have seen this coming, but at least one newspaper that I've seen via social media seemingly turning things around, and it's getting people upset, and they're like, oh my God, look what, it's the Washington Post. Look what billionaire Jeff Bezos is doing. He's taking the side of the wealthy multimillionaire CEO. But, it's not entirely wrong, the spin that they put on things. It is just a spin. But I saw somebody circulating a screen grab that they took from online. Why is it not immediately apparent to me? I didn't go through here, but it was basically saying, what's really going on here, or at least one way of looking at it, is that Luigi Mangione is a child of some significant privilege, the son of a scion, I guess you could say, of a prominent Baltimore family, very wealthy, owned lots of real estate and local radio station and a couple more things. Not least among them, by the way, an elder care company, which most likely made a significant profit off of denying people their care, by the way. because that's just the nature of the business, and an Ivy League graduate and a prep school graduate, et cetera, and then as they played it as he's lost his way, which he certainly did. But then that Brian Thompson, as they portrayed him in this clip, son of small town Iowa, who, worked his way up the ladder and was now ascending new heights as the CEO of United Healthcare, and like it was a little bit in reverse, like the hardscrabble CEO who finally, local boy who makes good, taken out by a child of privilege who just didn't get his way on something and lashed out, and now will have millions to spend on his defense. And, that's not entirely wrong, and something to consider. This is a complicated case for sure, but at the same time, of course, the lionization of Mangione as some sort of killer meeting out, the anger of the society and justice in some sense, still prevalent out there. It's going to be interesting to see how it's overcome by his defense attorneys. The Washington Post headline on the actual story, I think this is the story. I went to the Washington Post site to try and find it. I didn't find exactly what I saw on social media, but the headline now, Luigi Mangione, quote, had so much to offer, and I'm sure he did. Now he is a murder suspect. Okay, and that's a reversal of fortune all by itself. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out over the next couple of days. Many other things happening. Of course, just want to note for the record, Mitch McConnell apparently took a tumble again the other day, having nothing to do with this patio furniture, just leaving a meeting in the Capitol. Kind of happens from time to time with the elderly folks. Seems to be okay, but probably also, we say seems to be okay, was followed by medical personnel as he was returning to his office, according to the Hills coverage. No word in the Hills coverage whether the medical care was rendered by the free for members and anybody else who can find their way into the heart of the Capitol unmolested by Capitol Police and get their way to the office of the attending physician. On-site physicians who, while it's no longer entirely free for members, I believe they pay about $500 a year to be enrolled in the basically all-you-can-eat healthcare buffet that they have there. Meanwhile, of course, legislating that the rest of you have to, work in the salt mines in order to be able to afford a Band-Aid, et cetera, yada, yada. But just another recurring theme here on the show, reminding everybody that office still exists and members of Congress have no trouble. $500 a year. You need an MRI. You fall down while you're here. Need a heart test of some kind that would cost somebody else hundreds or even thousands of dollars. We'll arrange it. And Walter Reed and Bethesda Medical Center personnel will come in and administer it for you for free. It's a nice gig if you can get it. And probably a nice gig for the doctors as well. All right. Greg Dworkin is here. He's a doctor. That's a nice gig. He was, but now he's retired, which is an even better gig, as I understand it. Good morning, Greg. Gig. Yeah. I like it. It's done you well, I think.
Oh, I like it a lot.
Excellent.
I highly recommend it.
All right. We should all live so long. It's not that long either. It makes it sound like you're ancient. Wait a second. Okay. Come on.
Speaking of being a doctor once.
Yes.
I worked, because I had to,
right,
with
in order
United
to retire,
Healthcare, trying to get my patients coverage.
Mm-hmm.
And in the old days, you could just call a doc and work it out. But in new modern times, you can't do that. I totally get and understand how anybody and everybody can hate United Healthcare,
mm-hmm.
that company particularly, because it tends to deny things more than any other. Still not a good thing to go around shooting people, but what I found was interesting.
Not if you can help it.
Is that, you may or may not have known about Joe Rogan or Call Her Daddy or some of the interesting podcasts that are around there that just occupy a different space.
Yeah.
Well, you, David, may not have known about Dr. Glaucom Flecken.
I thought it was a joke. No.
Well, it is a joke, and I suspect you didn't. He's an ophthalmologist who does funny videos, and he's done these for years, satirizing and characterizing various medical specialties.
Okay.
He dresses and talks to himself as, hi, I'm the medical resident trying to get my patient up to the floor out of the ER, and hi, I'm the ER doc, and I'm the pediatrician, and it's the same guy just dressed differently, speaking in the way that he feels these specialties would speak.
Interesting.
That is to say, the ER docs are cowboys, the pediatricians are touchy-feely folks, exactly everything you would expect. It's very funny.
Okay.
And he's got a huge following. And so he has a video that I gave you where he wrote my thoughts on the United Healthcare CEO murder, basically where he's saying, look, everybody has been asking me what I think about this as a practicing doc.
Yeah.
Murder isn't good. I get it.
Most docs will say
think
that.
Whatever you want. I mean, it's just so complicated. I'm not going to tell you how to think about this. Think about this however you want to think about this.
Okay.
And that's probably the best analysis I've seen so far of what happened.
Yeah, good. Decide for yourself, you mean? That's
I
okay.
mean, it's complicated.
Yeah.
It's really super duper easy to understand why everybody hates United Healthcare. That doesn't mean you go knock off the CEO as if that's the person who did it to you.
Although, yeah.
Some people the reaction of, well, they had it coming. Well, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
the organization did, not this individual.
Yeah.
Basically, that's what Dr. Glaucon-Flecken is saying.
Interesting. Okay. Well, we'll check into that. Yeah. This it's been an interesting couple of days to see what this whole situation has revealed, and filling in the blanks is going to be real interesting too. When
that video I sent you, by the way, is only 2.5 minutes long.
Okay.
So if you want to play any of it, that's fine.
Oh, all right.
It'll give you an idea of what's going on.
Okay. Well, let's see. I need to.
But while you're doing that, let me just say that
okay.
The
I'll go through the preparations.
Actual manifesto has been published in full.
The actual one, because there's been some concern that we've seen some fakes along the way.
But the other concern is that you don't like to publish manifestos because you don't want to give people ideas or validate what he's doing. But this is just so far out and different. I mean, it's not like
it's original.
It's one of the shooters who has this ideology took from Christchurch. No, it's just like totally. I took this, I took that, I put it all together. It's a mishmash. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I don't make a whole lot of sense. What I did doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I just thought I would let you know. And as an example of the way that none of this makes sense, I cleverly got out of New York City only to carry the gun, the manifesto, and everything else on my person at all times so that when they picked me up in Altoona, Pennsylvania, because a McDonald's staffer noticed me and called it in, I just had everything there as a complete confession.
Okay, well, he was prepared. That's good.
Does that make sense? That doesn't make any sense.
No, I guess not.
I mean, I planned so carefully to get out of New York City, and I just made it so easy to catch me.
Well, we'll see what the psychiatrists have to say about that.
Is like a summary of everything. So do you have that thing queued up?
I do. I don't know if it's going to work, but I put it here. All right, let's see.
Okay, so I have been tagged hundreds of times about this United Healthcare CEO murder. Usually when I get tagged this much, it's because somebody slept in their contacts or used Visine. Don't do those things, by the way. So this is different. First, let me just clear something up. Jimothy is innocent.
Remember, he's an ophthalmologist.
He needs to stay gainfully employed. He would never do something like this. Also, two things can be true. One, that murder is bad, that even bad people who do bad things don't deserve to be executed. It's okay to think that. It can also be true that United Healthcare is an evil corporation that has caused pain and suffering to millions and millions of people over the years. This is a company that denies claims at a rate that's higher than every other insurer out there. They deny so many claims they have to outsource claim denials to a company that gets paid per denial. This company is called EvaCore, by the way. Come on. United Healthcare has vertically integrated their company to the point where they can dictate which medications patients are allowed to be on, not doctors. This routinely leads to patients who are chronically ill, who are stable on a medication regimen for years, who all of a sudden have to change medications to something that doesn't work, all because United Healthcare got a better deal from a pharmaceutical company. United Healthcare, or Optum's business strategy, is so anti-competitive that the FTC has sued them. And the CEO is the leader of this organization doing all of these terrible things. People are hurting. People are financially devastated by our healthcare system. They're not able to get the treatment that their doctors recommend. So it's not that hard to understand the social media reaction to this shooting.
All right. Well, we'll just pause for a second here and we can go on with the rest of it. But I get the setup, certainly. He's not saying they're good and they were mistakenly gunned down.
Right. No, and he's quite articulate about explaining why everybody hates United Healthcare in particular.
Yeah, all right. Well, let's hear a little bit more. Why not? You say it's only 2.5 minutes. Shall I roll on? Is there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, fine. I'll take your word for it.
I find it helpful.
Okay.
Which I would describe as unsympathetic. All the jokes, all the snark about the shooting, it's all a coping mechanism for
That's certainly true.
a population of people who feel powerless in our healthcare system. Who are any of us to tell people how to react to this very unique situation? Now, is violence the answer? No. Because I truly believe that there are far more effective ways at improving the healthcare system. And I'll tell you something that's been really encouraging to me over the last 24 hours. I've been making these healthcare related videos for years now, trying to educate people about the things that are going on in healthcare. And this is the first time where I've seen a lot of people, both in healthcare and outside of healthcare, actually discussing harmful health insurance policy. Take the Blue Cross Blue Shield a story about limiting the amount of anesthesia that can be given during a surgery.
We didn't talk about that one on the air, but yeah, it was very quickly. Although really, before I found, I did spend some time saying, is this a hoax? Really? Are they actually saying they're going to do this? But it had been rescinded by the time I tried to figure it out.
They wanted to defer the cost or move the cost over to the anesthesiologist, who charges an arm and a leg.
Yeah.
But, that's okay. They work with orthopedic surgeons.
And so they can get paid. That's nice.
They can get paid, yeah.
Okay. All right. We'll roll forward here.
That story has gone viral all over all the platforms. There's major news organizations picking this up. And I just learned that the state of Connecticut has blocked Anthem from instituting this policy. So use your voice in whatever way you see fit, and just never forget that social media can be an incredibly powerful tool for advocacy.
I see. Okay.
That's it. I mean, that's what you need to know.
That was a good job, and
you
well
can go
done.
back and look.
Good
at
job, Connecticut.
Stuff.
Okay.
But
Dr. Glaucon, what?
Feckham.
Glaucon Feckham. Okay. Well, we'll put a link in there rather than have anybody try to figure out how it's spelled. But you'll have to wait until the afternoon to get the link, unless you donate now or something. I don't know.
Okay. And here's a tiny piece of his manifesto, for example. A reminder: the U.S. is the number one most expensive healthcare system in the world, yet we rank roughly 42 in life expectancy. United is the indecipherable in his manifesto. Largest, but it's probably not a good adjective. No. Largest company in the U.S. by market cap, behind only Apple, Google, Walmart. It's grown and grown, but has our life expectancy? No. The reality is these indecipherable, again, have simply gotten too powerful, and they continue to abuse our country for immense profit because the American public has allowed them to get away with it, he wrote. Mm-hmm. Now, how this is a solution, I don't know. He then went on to say, obviously, the problem's more complex, but I don't have space, and I don't pretend to be the most qualified person to lay out the full argument. So he's not qualified to lay out the full argument, but he feels like he's qualified to be judge, jury, and executioner.
Yes, chiefly executioner. I don't know that he really did much jurying on that.
Well, by the time you get to be Judge Dredd, it's all folded into the same thing.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, all right. Well, it remains a dramatic and radical act, and we're having a hard time figuring out exactly how to regard this.
Right, and we haven't really talked about it. At least you and I haven't talked about it on the show. So I thought this was a really good way to introduce the topic and do it with a little depth. And, introduce you to this character anyway, who's kind of interesting.
Yeah, well, that's worth it.
Guy.
I'll take a look at the rest of the videos.
But I have non-medical people who send me his stuff all the time. Did you see what he did with pediatricians? Yeah.
Well,
I know.
It's going to be awfully hard to argue with. I can't tell you what to think about this. Yes, you can, you son of a bitch, and you better. I mean, what do you argue? Okay, he's right about that.
Yeah,
okay.
Well, there's some meme of some guy with a mustache who looks like a wrestler getting mad at somebody else screaming at him, just You can't tell me how to think. You can't tell me not how to think.
I don't know. There's an
I don't
angry
even know
cat
what you're
in
saying,
some
and I'm
of
mad at
them.
you for saying it.
The chairs get thrown. Yeah, all the good memes will come out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, let's turn overseas for a bit. And I want to talk a little bit more about Syria, which I've been talking about.
Syria. Okay.
Syria. And Turkey.
Oh, Turkey.
But here's a good start-off piece.
All right. World
David
goes to hell.
Called Why Syria Matters to You.
You, anyway.
We'll talk about why it matters to you.
Who, me? Yes.
The ramifications of the stunning changes in Syria are enormous and global. It's deeply significant. We can say that without knowing for sure where it will lead because of what it ends and what it changes, not only about the Middle East, but about geopolitics globally.
Okay.
We talk about how bad Assad is. And again, every day we have more terrible things coming out about their prison system. We went over that the other day.
Yeah.
The inaction of the world, including the U.S., when he began using chemical weapons against its own people, is an appalling failure, a stain on the Obama foreign policy legacy, and the blab, I might add, for stability over everything. And on that, many other world leaders who sat on their hands, the people of Syria, all of whom well understand the uncertainty, understandably celebrate his defeat and departure. We should as well. The rebels are led by a group called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS.
Yes,
they were originally affiliated with al-Qaeda, but in recent years have sought to modify their image to the point where Britain is considering announcing their terrorism thing and decided it's too soon. But they're acting
the terrorists with the heart.
In Aleppo, which is the first place they took, they appointed a Christian, a bishop, as the mayor, for example. Oh. And they're doing their best to try to get along with everybody. Oh, by the way, along those lines, I just should mention a tweet from Charles Lister, one of the subject matter experts I follow on this. U.S. mediation has secured a ceasefire east of Manbij, in which SDF-linked forces, which is to say Kurds, will withdraw to west of the Euphrates in return to the Turkey-backed SNA ceasing its assault. Because as soon as they could, the Turks started firing on the Kurds because that's what they do. So
whenever they get the chance.
Ceasefire brokered by the U.S. in that area, which I think is quite important.
Yes. And there was the mention yesterday of, there's going to be, or Monday, there are land grabs that will happen when the local government implodes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that was always the strongman theory for real politique types. He's a dictator and he tortures everybody, but at least the borders are stable. The borders of Syria have never been stable, of course.
Yeah.
But okay.
Nothing in the Middle East is stable.
Right.
So, again, a lot of
that's our fault.
Garbage, but no matter how bad
with the West.
New uncertain situation is, just again a reminder, New York Times has two pieces. I have it in the pundit roundup.
All right. I'll open that.
And I'll just tell you their blurbs here. A search in Syria for the disappeared. Relatives are never told what happened, but they knew. Many of the disappeared have been thrown into President Bashar al-Assad's vast network of prisons, where they were tortured and killed on an industrial scale. We talked about that the other day. But when you're talking about torturing and killing people on an industrial scale, it invokes World War II, so important.
Yeah.
What to know about Syria's notorious Sednaya prison? That's the second article. Amnesty International described it as a human slaughterhouse where other rights groups say tens of thousands of people were detained, tortured, and killed during the 13-year civil war. So you may not know who the good guys are, but we certainly know who the bad guys are.
Right. Okay.
And that was Assad. Anybody who was associated with that military slash civilian prison system, bad guys.
Yeah. And apparently everyone was entrepreneurial, freelance, outsourced prisons. Weird.
So Rothkopf goes on to write, Russia has suffered a setback. The only place Russia's made notable gains recently is with the election of Donald Trump. Speaking of Trump, his nominee to head the U.S. intelligence community, Tulsi Gabbard, had to be watching videos of Assad regime files being unearthed by the rebels with apprehension.
They had files. Good. All right.
At just the wrong moment for her considering her upcoming confirmation hearings.
Yeah.
Concerns about her Assad ties and her parroting Russian propaganda with regard to Ukraine have led to a move to have her confirmation hearings conducted in secret session so sensitive issues could be broached, and that's not good news for her.
Yeah, although I'd really dearly love to know how bad the situation actually is.
Well, you
with
do
her.
both. You know, you do public for that, which you can do public, and then you go to executive session for the stuff you can't.
Okay.
Now, more on Syria, and this comes from Twitter because you just can't find this stuff on Blue Sky and other places. This is a fella named Haid, H-A-I-D, Haid.
Haid. Okay, not
Yeah.
Hades.
And, you know, hey, listen, you can be Eric's son.
Yeah, right.
Son of Eric.
Hades.
Haid.
Haid.
HDS and its governance model, he writes, one of my biggest regrets is not turning my PhD thesis on HDS and its governance into a book.
Oh.
Because then he could have sat on it and not told us if it was a book.
I see. Well, I thought he needed something for the Chiron while he was on TV. Okay.
The topic remains critical for understanding how HDS has reached its current position and how it will likely act moving forward. My research explored why HDS succeeded while similar groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda failed. Basically, they're very practical and they're pragmatic. HDS's pragmatism allows it to use flexible tactics to expand authority while managing risks. In other words, they act differently in different cities.
All right.
Aleppo, we'll do a Christian. This other city, that wouldn't work. We'll do something different. But whatever it is, we'll do it if it works here.
I guess that's something. Yeah, I'm just wary of like, they were terrorists yesterday. And now, no, they were using flexible tactics.
Well, they have been for about 7 or 8 years, where they basically got rid of the terrorists and fought the terrorists. And,
you know what? Let's not terrorize. All right.
It's not working, so let's do something that works.
That's something. Right. Okay. So, yes. You abandoned your roots as a terrorist. You're a sellout.
And a new and different piece after the break, also just to explain a little bit about Syria, so people feel like they have some depth of understanding about the country.
Okay. Well, maybe there's time for Luigi Mangione to pull back from his terrorist roots and reform himself.
Oh, also, Syria has a new flag.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. We're changing our flag as well, the Kagro in the Morning flag, somehow. I'll start off with creating the first one, and then I will change it immediately. A lot's happening with the changes in Syria, and I don't know, I'm absorbed by the changes in the flag. That's always interesting. So, yeah, they've the old flag, as Greg mentioned, 2 stars. This one adds a 3rd star, changes the color of the stars, changes the color of the top stripe.
But uses the same basic colors.
Yes, and the reason...
So, since this is podcast/radio, you can't see it, even if I hold it up to the microphone. But I am going to read to you this very brief AI overview that Google provided for me when I asked.
Might be total crap, but I think it sounds right. Yeah, let's hear it.
It sounds truthy.
Sure.
We'll have to check it out later and see if it's real. Many Arab flags use the colors black, white, green, and red because they represent different periods of Arab history and are considered the pan-Arab colors.
Pan-Arabism,
Black is one set of caliphates. White is a different caliphate and also optimism and peace. Green represents yet a 3rd caliphate and is associated with the Prophet's family. Red represents the Hashemite dynasty. That would be like Jordan.
Yes. And
the struggle for freedom. The colors were first combined in 1916 in the flag of the Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire. Remember, the Turks and the Arabs didn't always get along.
I don't think, did they ever? I mean, it was...
And maybe in some cases they still don't.
Yeah, well, they
Many
dominated
current
them,
flags
but
of
they
Arab
didn't get
countries
along.
such as Jordan, Kuwait, Palestine, Sudan, and the United Arab Emirates are based on these
There we are.
colors.
Yeah, so you see a lot of them, and it's a little confusing because there's a lot of countries, and a lot of them are kind of small, and but they use the same colors over and over again, and there's a reason. And flag design is heraldic in its origin, so it makes sense that related peoples would have similar flags. I don't know.
Heraldic Rivera, I remember that.
Yeah, now, the Bahrainis and Qataris kind of went off the edge on that one with that weird zigzag thing. But even them, the two of them have it. So you think that's such a unique flag, but there are two of them out there. I've seen it.
Right.
It's wild. Okay, but very interesting, and that explains the repetition of those colors. And green has a particular significance, and it's why I guess the entirety of the Saudi flag field is green, and I think they hold themselves up, they style themselves as the descendants of those prophets that the green stripe represents on other flags. But they're
so
totally
thank
green.
You
have to listen to
I don't know anything about any of this stuff, but here are some interesting factoids
Yeah,
in the morning.
right.
David Waldman.
Green flags. I have a lot of flags in this house. Okay. I like them. They're the type. I feel like, doesn't Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory, you're totally into flags? I think so.
You mentioned something in the intro about like 15 years worth of this show.
Did I?
Right?
I didn't. If I did, I've forgotten about it. But maybe
because
what
you have
year
to
are we in
change some
here?
of the
Oh,
little
yes,
tags
right.
and breaks.
Yes, right. That's true. I don't know how many years though. I don't think it's. I don't know. I'll have to do math. I'll have to take a break on that one.
But it's a lot.
It is a lot. It's definitely over 10. I figured that part out.
It's over 10.
Yes.
And I don't know how long I've been doing the show, but certainly more than 5.
Yeah. Maybe all of those
so
10.
Why can't I get it right? I mean,
I don't know.
It's been all those years, and I still can't do it.
Yeah, well, so far, it's working out pretty good. We learned how to connect and disconnect, and I haven't hung up on you on purpose.
Yeah, well, that's true.
Okay.
I've hung up on you, though.
Yeah, that's true. All right.
I've reclaimed my time.
Okay, you can do it now. Stories, other ones, anything to do with colors?
Yeah, this last one, again, it's of interest because you hear stuff said, and, some...
I have.
Some subject matter expert who actually knew about Syria said it's really interesting listening to cable news and reading the newspapers in the U.S. and such, because they all have the same generic theory about what's going on, all of which are incredibly superficial and often wrong.
Well, yes. I think we're still looking to get credit for differentiating between Sunni and Shia Muslims here.
Yeah, and all the Shia offshoots.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. It makes for some
if you
fascinating
can tell
reading.
The difference between Alawite Druze, which imam they follow, and which is the Sunni side, which is the Shia side. Very important, but sort of mixed up in all of that is, and which are Turkic.
And it'll put a big dent in the all Muslims are problems that we have here in the United States, assuming people read and absorb the information.
Indonesia invades.
Wow. Yeah. It's a large and complex community because it involves millions and millions and millions.
So to give you an idea of how large and complex Syria itself is, this is Alex Simon. I've mentioned him before, researcher, who says, now that we're paying attention, I added that. He didn't really say that, but I'm saying.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Now that we're paying attention.
Yes.
Latakia and Tartus.
What?
Up in the northwest. Latakia has the airport.
Tartus
has the naval base.
Got it. I remember that.
Russian involvement.
Yes.
Okay. And they're often framed as Alawite strongholds of Syria's fallen regime.
Everything's a stronghold. Until it's not.
Right? This narrative obscures as much as it illuminates in a region as complex as any other. And some excerpts from a 2021 memo with insight from my brilliant colleague. Historically, the port cities of Latakia and Tartus were mostly populated by Sunnis and Christians.
Okay.
Who dominated an economy based on maritime trade.
All right.
Alawis lived in the mountainous hinterlands, subsisting mostly off of small-scale agriculture.
Syrian hillbillies.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
and they got mad.
Or the
Yes.
Alawites split off from Shia Islam.
Okay.
So the Alawites are, well, I don't know if Shias consider them Shias,
That's a good question.
but they're certainly not Sunnis.
So Syrian
So the cities were populated
Mormons.
by Sunnis and Christians, and the Shia offshoot was out in the
hinterlands,
rural areas.
as is frequently the case. The Shia tend to be sort of the outcast, downtrodden types in the broader Muslim Middle East.
Starting in the 1970s, Ba'athist state building brought growing numbers of Alawi migrants from the mountains to lowland towns and cities in search of public sector jobs. Mm-hmm. Because Ba'athist was basically state runs everything.
Yeah, they were secularists, and
in that sense, and they
felt
called
safe.
themselves secularists. Anyway.
Yes. Right. So it wasn't a Saudi-style Sunni-dominated government, so they felt safe in allegiance to it.
Right. So the region's urban fabric grew increasingly mixed. Mm-hmm. So this is essentially Sunni Christian big cities, and then rural Shia offshoot joins, and now you have a mixed group.
An immigration problem.
Rural Alawi migrants form neighborhoods on the margins of historical centers, crystallizing over time into pockets of urban poverty.
Did they fail to assimilate?
On the one side, and Alawi middle class compromising civil servants and private sector professionals.
Okay.
This heterogeneous social fabric produced hopeful displays of intergroup solidarity with mixed areas, witnessing genuinely multi-sectarian protests, but those demonstrations were suppressed by Assad, and the regime proved highly effective at stoking sectarian tensions through relentless propaganda and extreme violence targeting Sunni communities. Mm-hmm. And then the polarization by 2012 took on more of a physical form. Newcomers were overwhelmingly Sunni, but came from starkly divergent socioeconomic backgrounds. One group comprised middle and upper class business families from conflict-affected cities like Aleppo and Homs who moved to Latakia. Many brought their capital, their shops, and whole factories along with them. And then you had poor conservative rural families uprooted from hard-hit areas like Idlib and Hama, and they went to the coastal cities because they were more stable. Locals often distrusted the newcomers, particularly the poor, religiously conservative ones. Many hailed from areas that rebelled against the regime and came under the control of hardline Islamist factions feared by Alawi communities. So there was a lot of repression going on. And so to refer to these areas glibly as, oh, well, they're Alawite strongholds, sort of like misses everything about what actually happened over there. That's all I'm trying to convey.
Well, I mean, there's probably a good, primer to be written, sort of analogizing things to what happened. Well, it'd be difficult, but the way things happen here in the United States, which we kind of understand, as opposed to everything is a foreign culture to Americans. But yeah, I can understand these religious offshoots, and you say that there's, like, for instance, is Utah a Mormon stronghold? Would we say, yeah, sure, there's a lot of Mormon population there. Are there other people? Yes, there are. Do they hold prominent positions, and are they not excluded from civic life? Yeah, it's like that. Oh, you mean normal? Yes. Minus the Civil War. Right, and that's a big fight.
Yes.
Our Alawi tribesmen from the hinterlands, Muslim
these
at
are
all?
all complex
Shia?
issues, and I don't mean to make light of any of them. But, Simon just brings up a really important point, Alex Simon, and he says the point simply really is the region was always more diverse and dynamic than outsiders and some insiders give it credit for, but its disparate parts have much in common. Almost all of it is made up of refugees sinking deeper into misery, all have much at stake in building something new. So if you're all miserable under a particular ruler,
And
how
aren't
shall I
we?
put this? You tend to vote for anybody else.
Yeah, I'll take the other guy.
Well, that's what happened here.
Yeah.
And that's what happened there. And so all of a sudden, Assad falls, and these so-called Alawite strongholds are celebrating. How can that be? Well, Roger Simon helps to explain a little bit about how that can be.
Yeah. Well, that'll be...
They want something new.
That.
They don't like where they were.
Because the Assads were Alawi, but it wasn't helping them any, I guess.
Anyway, interesting concepts.
They forgot their roots.
People are complicated. Politics is complicated. The Middle East is very complicated.
Yes.
And anybody who has a simple solution to it, Donald Trump, you really don't understand the region at all, and what you're suggesting probably isn't going to work so well.
Okay. So, what else is new?
Well,
got anything else?
Some other things. Here's some interesting looks at what happened with the Latino Hispanic population.
Oh, okay.
Let me start with Tom Bonnier, who has some interesting things to say and says that we don't know yet because we don't have all the information. But one important thing to remember as we continue to digest the election results, especially around swings with Hispanics.
Yes.
Some, at least, of what we saw was due to turnout differentials, not vote switching or not just vote switching. So, in other words, if you're looking at, and he picks Delaware because he has some data.
Okay. Delaware?
Yeah.
Okay. That
so
wouldn't have been where I started.
In 2020, by party registration, Hispanics who showed up to vote were plus 46.9 Democratic. And in 2024, they were 36.7 Democratic.
Okay.
So a superficial analyst would look at this and say, oh, look, there's been a swing toward Republicans away from Democrats by the Hispanic population in Delaware.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that would be an initial reaction, certainly.
However,
okay,
the total turnout from Democratic Hispanics was equal to 2020.
Total number,
35% more GOP Hispanics voted this year. They didn't change their minds.
No.
They weren't persuaded.
I see.
What happened is the Democrats got the usual number of Democrats and Republicans got 35% more, which is a big number.
Yeah, that is.
So whatever was going on with messaging, motivation, it got Republican-leaning Hispanics to turn out in big numbers. Trump's voters showed up. So again, I've said this to you before, this is very reminiscent of 2004 and John Kerry. When Kerry initially saw the results, he was very pleased, his camp was, because they hit their numbers. What they didn't anticipate was George W. Bush was going to exceed what they figured Bush was going to get, and they lost Ohio by a smidge.
Right.
And that's what happened here this year. Democrats hit their numbers. Harris got the third most votes of any presidential candidate ever. For all the disparagement, because when you lose, like everything you did was wrong.
Yeah.
She got the third most votes.
Okay.
After Biden, who got the most, and Trump this year, who got the second most, unfortunately, and she got the third most.
Well,
she had a lot of voters vote for her. They showed up. It's just that Trump pulled more voters from somewhere, not as many as Biden, but more than he had in the past, and that's what won him the election.
Unless he pulled them from suitcases under the table.
If you're looking at the swing states, it was a small number, relatively speaking, to the U.S. population, voting eligible population.
Yes.
That won it. And that's also true, by the way, Dave Wasserman points out, for Congress. Like 3 districts made the difference between who runs Congress, and we're talking about a couple of thousand votes.
True. And I've also seen some people laying it at the feet of gerrymandering of districts in North Carolina in particular.
That had a lot to do with it, but the bottom line...
that's where you could produce 3 seats right away.
Is, if you're going to lay the fault at anybody, it's probably Joe Biden for not, deciding not to run.
Oh. Okay, well, he was very busy.
Yeah, if he had decided not to run, a lot of this... You could have run as a new person, but you couldn't run as a new person the way it was set up. Did the best she could based on what she had. Did well, relatively speaking. Can't say fine because she lost.
Could even say.
But Bernie is pointing out she got her voters.
Yeah.
And so
We
let's
just need
look
bigger
at some
numbers.
other areas.
Next time you hit your numbers, have them be larger ones.
Exactly. So this is Roger Karma writing in The Atlantic, why Democrats got the politics of immigration so wrong for so long. They spent more than a decade tacking left on the issue to win Latino votes. It may have cost them the White House twice, and there's a lot of other stories that run along the same lines. You know, this wasn't economic anxiety. It wasn't inflation. People could deal with that. Immigration turned out to be such a huge issue relative to how Democrats were playing it. And again, it's not that abortion didn't matter, but two, maybe three basic things when you look at everybody's analysis, you know, through lines. People were mad at Biden. They felt like he shouldn't have run. That's number one.
But then when he doesn't,
number two,
don't be mad.
Yeah, inflation was a problem, but not so much inflation. Nobody cares about inflation per se. What they're talking about is the cost of living and the price of groceries.
Even if you don't know
that's
what they
why
are.
when the Fed says, look, inflation's only 1.9% now, people say, yeah, but look at the price of eggs. I don't really care.
Gas? Yeah.
Gas is better. I like that. But look at housing costs. You know, so cost of living overall was an enormous issue, not inflation per se. And
Yeah,
so
I guess I
touting
can
that
see
you
that.
did better on inflation wasn't a winning message.
And the year-over-year thing is inflation. Well, okay. I mean, it hasn't gone up that much this year, but it's, you know, over
But it went up
10
enough,
years, it's
or corporation price gouged enough so
certainly
that
could be.
You know,
That was
groceries
proven.
cost more than I want them to.
Yes, and that actually
matters.
was proven in the groceries context.
Yeah.
And
then the
yet-
third thing, of course, was immigration. And no matter how much you downplayed it, it turned out immigration was an enormous issue, particularly for Latinos, because in the end, they weren't any different than anybody else.
Well, isn't that ironic?
That's what this piece goes into. The election of Donald Trump this year shattered a long-standing piece of conventional wisdom in American politics. Latinos will vote overwhelmingly for whichever party is the more liberal approach to immigration, making them a reliable Democratic constituency. This view was once so pervasive that the Republican Party's 2012 post-election autopsy concluded the party
that's
needed
right.
to move left on immigration.
Well, then they didn't. But then they were
Yeah.
right to not do it, apparently, except for it being
Well, yeah, because if
morally
that
wrong.
analysis were true, the nomination of the most virulently anti-immigration presidential candidate in modern history for 3 straight elections should have devastated the GOP's Latino support. It
Yes.
didn't. The opposite happened.
Yeah. And, you know, and I guess maybe in hindsight, it really should have been. Naturally, you would prefer that it be in foresight, but the explanation makes sense. It's just sort of part of human nature. Well, you know, obviously immigrants are going to want to make it easy for immigration. No, they actually want to pull the ladder up behind them, and very often end up resenting even those of their own national origin or ethnicity for coming later. And, you know, that somehow they're always, I don't know, they look down on the people who come later for whatever reason, even though they're from the same place.
I remember talking about this with my patients in the office. I distinctly remember having these conversations.
Yeah.
And these were working class folks working really hard, Ecuadorians for the most part, given where I live. And what they told me is very simple. We work really hard, and then these people come and they get stuff. And I resent it.
Yeah, even though they frequently got stuff when they first arrived, and that was the stuff that helped them set up to work very hard afterwards.
Don't argue with me, argue with them. So
I will.
what the Atlantic
Where are they?
says...
Do they make videos on YouTube? All right.
Well, in those days, no. The Democratic Party's embrace of these groups was based on a mistake that, in hindsight, and he's talking about groups that progressive immigration advocacy nonprofits.
Okay.
The Democratic Party's embrace of these groups is based on a mistake that, in hindsight, appears simple, conflating the views of the highly educated progressive Latinos who run and staff these organizations and who care passionately about immigration and policy reform with the views of Latino voters who overwhelmingly do not. Avoiding their mistake might well have made the difference in 2016 and 2024. It could therefore rank among the costliest blunders the Democratic Party has ever made. Your average, everyday Latino voter is no different than any other voter.
That is super ironic, given, of course, that they ended up voting for the party that said because they are different from everybody else, we want to get rid of them. But they are not, and they vote for you because they're not, and then they'll all be swept up because they're brown.
Now, if you talk to people who actually know what's going on, you get interesting responses. This is Fernand Amandi, the lead Latino-focused pollster and strategist of both of Obama's presidential campaigns.
Okay.
And he told me, the author of this piece, that Obama won over Latino voters through a relentless focus on the issue they cared about, above all others, the economy. Contrary to some media narratives, the one issue we didn't touch was immigration. It never registered as a top issue for Latinos. You may recall people yelling at Obama for his family policies on the border.
Okay.
And his campaign decided, doesn't matter. Voters don't care about it, so we don't care about it.
Oh, all right.
What they really cared about was pocketbook issues. For most of his first term, Obama resisted activist demands to embrace more liberal immigration policies because he believed doing so would cost Democrats crucial votes. A stance that eventually earned him the nickname Deporter-in-Chief from activists. Even so, by the time Obama signed DACA, internal campaign polls showed him polling in the high 60s with Latinos. The executive order might have contributed a few percentage points at best. That version of events tracks closely with decades of polling data showing that Latinos, 80% of whom lack a college degree, view the economy as the most important issue, typically followed by other pocketbook concerns such as health care.
Okay.
So if you think of Latinos as non-college, right,
and
then
be right.
Act accordingly.
Interesting. That's a theme that comes up in a lot of different issue areas, that the educated activists just aren't the same as the rank and file, and it may be misleading to listen to their very erudite explanations of exactly why this is the best policy. Might not be electorally the best policy. On the other hand, it's very frequently morally the correct direction.
Well,
that's what their training
it's on both sides of the aisle, on both sides of the political spectrum.
Not us, of course, but everybody else.
But it may well be that, like, the more articulate you are about explaining what's going on, the more out of touch you are.
Maybe. That's actually, that too, an undercurrent of a lot of new theorizing and a lot of work that, explaining, well, if you're high-minded and speaking about policy, when people want, essentially, well, as you've told us 100 times, wrestling kayfabe, then, they may view, even when you're explaining how much better it really would be for everybody, recent arrivals, second-generation immigrant families, whatever the issue is, listen to the policy, apparently not very interesting, and then they complain, well, I didn't vote for you because I didn't know what your policies were. I couldn't find your web page. You didn't speak to the press enough about your policies. It's interesting, and it happens across issues and across communities, and it happens over and over again too. And it's I guess the great conundrum about it is, while it would be, I guess, electorally wiser to take your guidance from the immigrant communities who, in fact, want to pull up the ladder and close the door behind them, it's not fair or right. And by the way, probably not at all good preparation for waves of immigration still to come when it becomes more climate driven. And there are just simply the immigrant communities, I think, that are on their way have very little choice. It's funny, just like the January 6th rioters in Trump's view. They had no choice, and neither will the coming waves of immigrants have any choice about staying where they are or remaining in Mexico. And the only humane thing to do is to look towards a future where, you're going to have to continue admitting people who are climate refugees, but I don't know if that message is going to get through to people who really want to close the door behind them because they want to protect their jobs.
Well, just like Syria, just like the Middle East, things are complicated.
Darn it.
And if you're trying to explain things in fairly simple terms about what really happened, you probably don't really understand what's going on. If you're trying to explain why the Latin
Latino community voted a certain way, to me, the best explanation I can think of is that they vote like everybody else. Non-college Latinos are non-college voters.
Yeah.
And so, act accordingly, and expecting them to be something else, that's not happening.
I must say, every time you say it, it renews my sense of irony of all the things that seem to drive white non-college MAGA voting behavior turn out to be untrue and wrong, and they're really going to have to learn to, at some point, I guess, if they want to solidify their coalition, learn to embrace conservative-leaning Latino voters. I don't know if they will.
Wrong, but get your vote. Is the point I think I'm trying to make here.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
It's not
that
good.
They're very well adapted.
It's now that I understand it, I'll embrace this idea. Look, I mean, it's complicated, but do understand that non-college votes a certain way, and one has to adjust for that when you're trying to put your electoral coalition together.
Yeah, and I guess I don't know whether I don't know whether it was brilliant strategy by the Trump folks and whether they really and truly understood what was happening, or just the beneficiaries of the pieces falling into place. But I guess this also helps us understand all the post-election interviews with lots of people, but in particular Latinos, saying, well, I understand the deportation threat, but he's not going to deport me. I'm a hardworking, regular American kind of guy.
Well, again, that goes into another broader theme. I mentioned that the price of living was a big deal. Immigration was a big deal. Another big deal was because of his celebrity status, people were unwilling to believe bad things about Trump. They just didn't want to believe it.
Well,
right? It's either partisan, you're lying, I don't think he's as bad, the first term wasn't as bad, whatever reason, people would not accept that the bad things about Trump were true. We're going to find out the hard way they are, but that was an electoral reality.
All right. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Interesting discussion. Also, you all missed it because it happened during the break, but it was just interesting to me, as Greg was pointing out, what an interesting thought, the idea somehow catching on in America, or anywhere for that matter, that because Trump was a celebrity, it was difficult to believe bad things about him, which is amazing because one of the biggest communications sectors in America, catering, I would guess, to the same crowd, the white non-college crowd, nothing more popular in my days growing up anyway, than the supermarket tabloid, which thrives almost entirely on telling you bad things about celebrities, which is kind of amazing. That didn't come up in the conversation. That just occurred to me now. But just sort of the idea, cultural, I guess has to be a very modern adaptation. The idea that, these things can't be true because celebrity or famous person. And of course, I guess throughout the balance of history up until like the last couple of years when modern PR, I guess, maybe took over. I don't really know. Or just maybe modern communications changed the picture. But I mean, the most famous people in history, generally speaking, are going to be among the most heinous abusers of human rights and morality that you can think of. The great men theory of history mostly left giant piles of bodies in their wake. It just, I don't know. I mean, maybe the roots of this celebrity worship does come from that after all. I don't know. I guess this is for non-college educated. Well, that person's very famous. They must have done something great, or we're taught that they do something great. And then it's only at the college level that you learn, all right, well, it's true that they made this big mark in history, but the big mark was mostly blood. They killed millions on, Alexander the Great. He's great. He's great. It's like he loves Frosted Flakes, right? It says he's great right in the name. Why is he great? He conquered most of the known world. Conquer. That sounds good. Look into it on the college level. Conquer. Actually, that means killed all resistance. But then, it's a nuanced picture. He embraced diversity among those under his dominion. That was an adaptation that became necessary in order to hold the empire together, to the extent that it was held together. But, of course, you didn't get a chance to, enjoy the diversity and tolerance until your army had been defeated. And we know what that means. I guess in the abstract, in the year XYZ BC, there was this battle, that battle, and it was very famous. And the strategy was studied for centuries afterwards. Right, but it was wholesale slaughter, millions dead, right? Not necessarily on the battlefield, but certainly scattered across the empire. Deaths of millions to create this moniker, the Great. Yes, that's a good point. Where are you going with this one? All right, very interesting discussion, certainly. Getting into the nitty-gritty of all sorts of things today, the heraldry of flags and the great slaughters that underlay the famous names in world history. How about something else? There's plenty for us to go on here, and so many different directions we could go. I told Greg as we went into the break that I had something that we could possibly discuss tomorrow, and I had hinted at it yesterday, and then I ended up reading a related but different story. And I mentioned it again to him today during the break that I've got a story that makes prominent mention of the importance. Well, it's not all that prominent. Once you read the whole thing, you'll see what I mean. Makes mention of the importance of yard signs, which is an ongoing thing between us. And where is this one? I had this set aside, but I started reading a different story, which was also very interesting, and I do want to get back to. But yeah, if I can scroll, if I can find either one of them, they were more or less next to one another in Pocket. And now, there we are, a New York Times piece. All right, illustrated with a picture that made me skip right over it. It was actually illustrated with a picture of a Dunkin' Donuts. So maybe you've seen this one, and this will ring a bell. And it doesn't really have anything to do with the donuts. This is interesting, and we haven't discussed this, but but I guess in our post-election analysis, this might be of some interest and might make a decent segue. How alarmed Harris staffers, the headline says, went rogue to reach black and Latino voters. Very interesting, and now we have to question not only their methods and motives, but the wisdom of their having done so at all in the context that Greg introduces things today. The subheader here, worried that the campaign was neglecting voters of color in Philadelphia and other battleground cities. And that's hard to imagine it being a worry with this ticket, and yet that was the worry. Organizers secretly gathered at a Dunkin' Donuts, that explains the picture, and elsewhere to get out the vote. And we just don't have any pictures of elsewhere. Just Dunkin' Donuts. And is it the Dunkin' Donuts that they gathered at? I don't even know. It's a Dunkin' Donuts. I don't know if it matters. Nicholas Nehamas, hope I got the name right there, Maya King and Zolan Kano Youngs team up for the byline in this December 7th piece, again, in the New York Times, 2 days before the November election. And it seems like you're running out of time if that's when you're working. They were clearly panicked about it. But 2 days before the November election, a rogue team of campaign organizers for Vice President Kamala Harris turned a Dunkin' Donuts in Philadelphia into their secret headquarters. They didn't change the signage in any way, but that's how secret it was. It looked to all, for all intents and purposes, like a Dunkin' Donuts because it was one. What they mean is they just met there of their own volition and in secret. Their mission was simple. Knock on the doors of as many black and Latino voters as they could in neighborhoods that they believed the Harris campaign had neglected in its get out the vote operation. And they could not let their bosses find out. This is already very intriguing. They called it Operation Dunkerque. Get it? Dunkirk. A gallows humor joke about the desperate World War II mission to save Allied troops trapped by Nazi armies in France. Always the subject of good humor. Fueled by boxes of coffee in their impromptu boiler room, I guess they must have left the Dunkin' Donuts if they took the boxes of coffee, the small team of operatives crunched internal campaign data beneath purloined Harris Walls signs and directed dozens of volunteers across the city's core Democratic wards. Why were they purloined signs? Maybe that gets answered elsewhere. I would have thought that they had free access to such signs. But apparently it was difficult to get them, which, is why I was interested in the story. Many of the thousands of black and Latino voters that they talked to said they had never heard from the campaign. A stunning breakdown so close to Election Day, and that other people would, I guess, view as evidence of taking certain neighborhoods or perhaps certain demographics' votes for granted, which doesn't sound like a good idea. I was the first one knocking on these doors, said Amelia Purnell, a Harris campaign organizer involved in setting up the clandestine Dunkin' Donuts field office in North Philadelphia. They hadn't talked to anybody. It was like, hey, nobody has come to our neighborhood. The campaign doesn't care about us, which is a remarkable thing for a campaign, for a ticket headed by a woman of color to have left behind. What an impression to have given to communities of color. The campaign doesn't care about it. It's not automatic. It's not you can see or even hear or read about my relationship to, my connection to communities of color, and therefore you should make this conclusion. It's still really a retail game. They have to actually show up at your door. I thought only Iowans and New Hampshireites thought this way, but I guess not. The Dunkin' Donuts office and several similar efforts in Philadelphia, often funded independently by Democratic donors, how they get them to do this, through nonprofit voter education groups, reflected deep frustration within the campaign. Numerous Harris organizers believed it was failing to invest in mobilizing black and Latino voters in the nation's sixth largest city, the biggest prize in the election's most populous battleground state. This article is based on interviews with 11 Harris campaign staff members. Is that a statistically significant number? I don't know. And volunteers who were directly involved in organizing the stealth efforts in the weeks before the election, but which only manifested itself days before, apparently, most of whom insisted on anonymity to talk candidly about internal campaign matters. The New York Times also spoke with more than 20 other campaign officials, volunteers, Democratic Party operatives, and elected leaders who were involved in voter outreach around the country and described how it fell short. The covert operations, many of them led by black organizers, represented extraordinary acts of insubordination against the Harris campaign. Interesting. Campaign organizers in Philadelphia said they were told not to engage in the bread and butter tasks of getting out the vote in black and Latino neighborhoods, such as attending community events, registering new voters, building relationships with local leaders, and calling voters. It's interesting only because we were told that they were doing this at unprecedented levels, as Trump might have put it, like no one's ever seen before. But, in fact, they were not, and that seems odd and out of keeping with what we were told about what was going on in the campaign. Instead, they said, they were instructed to spend most of their days phoning the same small pool of volunteers and asking them to knock on voters' doors and help run field offices, which at first blush doesn't sound like it's all that much out of keeping with the way things usually work. Yeah, you call volunteers and ask them to knock on doors. That's a door-knocking operation, sure. But how does it differ? I don't know. The strategy essentially turned experienced organizers into glorified telemarketers, making hundreds of calls daily, with some harried volunteers begging to be taken off call lists. Staff members also said that the campaign did not hire enough black and Latino campaign workers or political consulting firms that were owned by people of color. That does raise an eyebrow. Two different eyebrows. One, why didn't you? And two, hey, isn't this the same complaint we usually get, especially in postmortems? The real problem was they didn't hire my consulting company. Okay, I see there's a little bit of that in there, too. But this was apparently a source of continuing frustration among Democratic operatives that they say has contributed to the erosion of the party's multiracial base. The Harris campaign said it had made sustained and comprehensive efforts to reach voters of color, including a paid canvassing operation that knocked on the doors of 1.3 million black and Latino voters in Pennsylvania. It also said it had teams of staff members separate from its field organizing division who were dedicated to community engagement. Those teams worked with the local leaders and took on projects like distributing 1,000 "We Won't Go Back" posters to black and Latino small businesses and painting murals in well-trafficked areas. The campaign began buying ads targeted to black and Latino voters in the fall of 2023. And Ms. Harris made frequent appearances across Philadelphia, including visiting a church, a barbershop, and a Puerto Rican restaurant in one day, while the campaign deployed top surrogates to the city, including Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York. Kellen White, a senior advisor to the Harris campaign in Pennsylvania, said in a statement, "This campaign did more in Philadelphia to reach black and Latino voters than any campaign has done in a long time. The issue is not that we didn't knock on these doors. We knocked on a ton of doors. The problem was that the message itself didn't connect." And that's what we as a party need to spend our time and energy on, trying to understand why we knocked on these doors. What we had to say didn't resonate with enough voters. Or understand why, when we knocked on these doors, it didn't register. But Isaiah Thomas, a Philadelphia City Council member, said the campaign waited too long to harness the energy generated by Ms. Harris's nomination. Well, how much time did you have? The blitz that happened at the end of the campaign was too little too late, he said. The momentum got down because there was no activity happening. Next section here, entitled, a quote from somebody, "No sign that we were in the fight of our lives." Really, though? No sign at all? On election night, Ms. Harris drastically underperformed in Philadelphia. And I guess you can't argue with that, assuming the result is real. Although she picked up support in white precincts near downtown, she lost votes in some Latino and black neighborhoods elsewhere in the city. In interviews, many Democrats expressed little surprise, saying that the Harris campaign had devoted much of its energy to winning over moderate white voters in wealthier neighborhoods and suburbs, both in Philadelphia and around the nation. In an October memo, her campaign wrote that the path to win Pennsylvania capitalizes on Trump's unprecedented weakness in the suburbs. As a result, many staff members felt that Philadelphia's racially diverse neighborhoods were ignored. Even though the campaign raised $1.5 billion, many of its field offices in the city were filthy and lacked basic supplies like tables, chairs, cleaning products, and printers, staff members said. Several recounted being forced to raid the campaign's better-stocked suburban offices to raise money independently. One office received more than 20 boxes of campaign T-shirts, only to discover an embarrassing misspelling of Harris Walls, or rather Harriz Walls, Harriz. Yeah, well, those aren't going to do you much good, but that can't really be, the heart of the reason why you lost the campaign. Well, this boxes of T-shirts are no good. Okay, what else? The offices were sometimes far from the communities they were supposed to serve. One office meant to get out the vote in West Philadelphia, where Will Smith was born and raised, on the playground where he spent most of his days, you remember. A predominantly black area was so far west, in fact, this office was, that it sat on the border with Montgomery County, a wealthy white suburb. Others were set up in gentrifying neighborhoods where the campaign could easily reach young white professionals but struggled to engage working-class voters of color. In South Philadelphia, another racially diverse neighborhood, campaign staff members were operating out of public parks, grocery store parking lots, and church basements until the month before Election Day. And then the big part here that we came here for, there were no yard signs. That's That's right. There were no yard signs. There was no visibility. There were no T-shirts. Of course, we found out what happened to some of those T-shirts. Said Donald Baird, who worked on the presidential campaigns of John Kerry and Barack Obama and volunteered with Ms. Harris's Get Out the Vote operations in Philadelphia for 2 months. Now, if you were a veteran of Kerry and Obama campaigns and you're still saying there were no yard signs, I think that was kind of interesting. You certainly didn't absorb the lesson from the top-level campaign strategists who tried to hammer home the message that yard signs don't vote. T-shirts don't vote either. Visibility doesn't vote, but, they're all supposed to generate those votes at some point, and they still matter in certain places. It really gets people's backs up when they can't get access to campaign paraphernalia for some reason. There was nobody handing out literature. There were no bumper stickers. There was no sign that we were in the fight of our lives in the most important city in a presidential campaign. I don't know if this is really true about being at the heart of the underperformance in Philadelphia, but I don't know. It's an interesting view that keeps getting expressed and over again. And it's really interesting to see this competition between differing camps of consultants, what it really comes down to, differing camps of consultants. And while they, are, I think, right in leveraging, or certainly wise to leverage their connection to certain communities and certain demographics, and you need to hire more consultants that are owned by members of these communities, I guess, or that have, and therefore claim better connection to these communities. It's still, at the end of the day, a competition between camps of consultants. One camp which believes not at all in the importance and power of these old school visibility tools, and another which does. And it's really interesting because I think it was really the Kerry and later the 2 Barack Obama campaigns that hammered home as a theme. These things don't produce votes. They just don't. And then when they were not available and votes didn't materialize, I don't know what to tell you. And now they're in, now there's camps of consultants fighting with one another. And then, by the way, I haven't seen much in the way of defense of that theorem either. No, this isn't the reason. Those things don't vote. You can't blame those for a lack of votes. Well, okay. It's just that there's a lot of people talking to the newspaper that do blame the lack of votes on that. And seems like, that's usually the local color that you are missing from national campaigns and that you're always admonished really needs to be added from the grassroots up. And we seem to have one of these stories every single time. All right, to continue on with this one, I did come to say the yard sign complaint. But like they were putting it, there was no sign that we were in the fight of our lives in the most important city in the presidential campaign. The Trump campaign and its allies sensed an opportunity, using targeted advertising and a handful of outreach events to reach voters of color, especially young men, and to make inroads with key parts of the Democratic base. Everyone was wondering what Trump kept doing, showing up in Philadelphia or sending surrogates there. The problems went beyond Philadelphia. Mayor Dwan B. Walker of Aliquippa, I think I got that right, a small city outside of Pittsburgh, said the campaign had agreed to fund a Get Out the Vote bus tour for the state's black mayors, many of whom represent rural areas. But, he said, the money was pulled with little explanation. Politics is local, Mr. Walker said. We keep saying that, but this campaign didn't touch it. Are there others who would disagree? I don't know. But I bet you could find some. Some Democrats in other battleground states expressed similar concerns. Ms. Harris lost every swing state, including Pennsylvania. You definitely got to look at that, right? Keith McCants, the chair of a county Democratic Party in a rural part of Georgia with many black voters, said the Harris campaign's Get Out the Vote operation had been non-existent, even as he had pleaded for resources. They didn't do nothing, absolutely nothing, he said. They thought those black voters are going to come home. They will vote for her regardless because she's a black woman. So let's just focus on the suburbs. I could see that possibly being the case. Next up, a fight over strategy. Many Democrats have argued that Ms. Harris's loss was primarily caused by factors like inflation. Well, we talked about that possibly not having anything to do with anything. And President Biden's late decision to drop out. That may have. And that she could have done little differently. But her campaign's strategic choices still have come under intense scrutiny as the party debates whether it needs to rebuild itself from the ground up. And I guess I also want to pause just to remind everybody here, that should be in the back of your mind, that we'll also hear plenty of stories that, well, if 230,000 votes across X number of states had gone the other way, she could have won. She might not have won the popular vote, but she might have been able to pull off an electoral college victory. And yeah, then you would be hearing about what a genius strategy this whole thing was. You know, a swing of just a couple 100,000 votes one way or the other. I mean, prior to the election, we were talking about what in the world are the Trump people thinking? They have no professional get-out-the-vote operation. They outsourced it to Charlie Kirk, and Charlie Kirk failed to be able to do it, so they outsourced it to Elon Musk, and he has no idea. And they are finding that the people that they're hiring to do their GOTV are faking their stats and not knocking on doors. There's no way this can work. And had 250,000 votes in the right places swung the other way. See, I told you so. Harris is a genius and Trump is a moron. But it didn't. It swung the different direction, and now everybody is going to claim the genius mantle on the other side, and the failure mantle belongs to Harris. Well, maybe not. That close to being genius. Maybe it's not genius. Maybe it's all just, luck of the draw, and there are no geniuses, and you should stop hiring people on the genius basis. Ms. Harris's top advisors have said that her campaign greatly improved on Mr. Biden's early summer standing. She did. And that they had too little time to run a full campaign. That's true, too. As evidence that their tactics produced results, they pointed to the fact that Ms. Harris did better in the battleground states where she campaigned heavily. That is also true. And that in solidly blue states, where she did not campaign quite as hard, she underperformed. Well, okay, that's evidence of show up and campaign in places, and I guess that will help you. Did you win, though? No. But, I don't think there's any campaign consultants out there saying the secret to winning is to not show up and not try hard. I don't think anybody says that. Ryan Boyer Sr., a labor leader in Philadelphia, said he thought the Harris campaign's problem, everybody's got an idea, was a message that did not connect with working-class Americans, not a flaw in its get-out-the-vote infrastructure. I think that we had a lot of reproductive rights commercials and not enough bread and butter economic messaging, he said. Yeah, right. We did hear that complaint prior to the election, but then there was always the counter. This is what's motivating turnout. This is what's turning red states into secret blue voters when it comes to, let's say, referenda on abortion rights. And it was true. And it was still true even after the election. It was just true that, people were coming out of there saying, we have voted for Donald Trump, but we also want abortion rights, and we voted for that thing too. Oh dear. Why were we not able to put that particular 2 and 2 together? But many black campaign staff members and political operatives said campaign leadership dismissed concerns that Democrats were taking their base for granted. After Ms. Harris's loss, black campaign employees set up a call to talk about career opportunities with Angela Rye, a political strategist and podcast host. Thank God we have more podcast hosts involved. The discussion quickly shifted as they shared their anger at how the campaign had treated them and how underfunded and haphazard their field operations had been in several battleground states, according to a recording of the call obtained by the Times. An internal survey commissioned by the Harris campaign also found that black staff members were frustrated with the campaign leaders and felt that their ideas were ignored at a rate far higher than their peers. Oh dear. Some complained of outright racial discrimination. The campaign's leadership was made aware of the survey's results, and that's got to be frustrating if if true, and really could be frustrating even if it's not true, to find that out about a campaign headed by a woman of color. Few of these frustrations have been leaked to the public, and you can understand why. Nobody wanted to leak that during the campaign. And, of course, it should also be pointed out, yes, it was a campaign headed by a woman of color, but she was a little busy at the time. Okay, so, that might have created a problem, too. At any rate, in an all-staff call after the election, Quentin Fulks, the principal deputy campaign manager, told staff members that talking to the press would ruin their career prospects, 4 people on the call said, and that might, in fact, have been true. Was it a threat or was that advice? Maybe a little of both. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Seems we're going to stay in the deep strategy post-mortem phase of things today rather than catching up on all of the various bits and pieces of current and breaking news. But perhaps we can spend some more time on that later in the week. We'll see. I don't know. I get distracted with these things. But this is of some interest to me, I think, and hopefully to you as well. Let's finish up with this New York Times piece. Then we can jump back to something else that we were discussing yesterday that we didn't get to the meat of it that I really wanted to share. Because, sometimes writers get distracted and go off on tangents just the way we do here. Where were we with this? Lauren Hitt, a Harris campaign spokeswoman, denied that Mr. Fulks, Quentin Fulks, that we heard about people. This was the person who said, speaking out would ruin your career prospect. Like I said, could be a threat, could be advice, could be a little of both. But she denied that Fulks had used that language or tone on the call and said that he had instead counseled staff members against saying something in a moment of anger that could come to hurt themselves or the vice president. So like I said, I see it probably as a little bit of both. Next section here, campaigning under the radar. So what happened here eventually? What did they decide to do? In Philadelphia, Operation Duncan Kirk was not the only freelance effort organized by frustrated campaign workers. One staff member said that he raised tens of thousands of dollars to pay for operations to register voters and distribute campaign literature at public transit stops, as well as to put up lawn signs. See, I told you. Lawn signs in black and Latino neighborhoods. I guess that's the visibility part. Another described a rogue surrogate operation that brought the actor Delroy Lindo. Not familiar, but maybe I should look him up. I'm just notoriously terrible with the names of actors and actresses, and then I see their picture and say, oh yeah, I've seen him in 100 things. Just never learned anybody's name. And who else? Former Mayor Michael Nutter of Philadelphia brought in to speak at black churches and barber shops. Good stops, we've learned from campaigns past. It's just interesting to see this idea, and to think about the fight that will be going on in the background when this article is read and digested at the various consultancies. It's one person, sort of lone wolf say, I know how to fight in my neighborhood. I know how this needs to be done. And I'm not seeing the campaign do it. I'll take it upon myself to raise tens of thousands of dollars to pay for operations, to register voters and distribute campaign literature at transit stops. Sounds good. As well as put up lawn signs in these neighborhoods. And you hear other people saying, no, that's why you had to do this all on your own, because you were specifically instructed. I know this doesn't feel right to you, but trust the campaign plan, the yard signs. They don't vote. We're trying not to spend money on those things. Well, you just don't understand. This controversy will not go away. But it's not really about the yard signs. It is, I think, at its heart always about, well, this is my strategy and that's your strategy, and we're going to fight, because whoever wins the strategy battle will also get dollars as well. And if there's a win, they'll be able to claim the win. And if you are shut out and they don't go with your strategy and there's a loss, you get to blame the loss on the people who took the money last time, and maybe you'll get it next time. But I think the days of sending the bulk of the money to the local activists who will buy yard signs and literature with it is just gone. It just is. Another described there was the Rogues Target operation with Delroy Lindo and Michael Nutter. Others set up a program to text voters in Arabic. That doesn't seem like one that should have been neglected by the campaign at large, but maybe it was. Quentin James, a founder of the Collective PAC, a group that focuses on black elected officials and voters and that worked with the Harris campaign, recounted frantic campaign staff members in Philadelphia, Detroit, and North Carolina, calling him in the final weeks of the race to say they did not have enough money to provide food or water to volunteers. Black staffers reached out to me directly and said, we need additional support, Mr. James said, even with defeat staring them in the face. Although, at the time, everybody else thought, no, I think it's victory that's staring us in the face. Harris campaign leaders seemed in denial about the situation in Philadelphia. Late on election night, Jen O'Malley Dillon, the campaign chair, wrote an all-staff email saying that the Harris campaign had, quote, overperformed turnout expectations there, especially in areas with non-white voters. And they had, I guess, in some of these areas, but it was not enough. In the end, Ms. Harris received roughly 35,000 fewer votes in Philadelphia than Mr. Biden did 4 years earlier. Interesting. There's a lot that could go into that, and it's not even a whole lot, 35,000 fewer votes. And I don't know that T-shirts, even with correctly spelled T-shirts, would have necessarily changed all of that. I guess also, not seen in any of these discussions about Philadelphia. Heavily black city, sure. Black candidate, sure. But, blah, 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 didn't get as many votes as Joe Biden there. He's white. What the hell's going on here? Well, Joe Biden was the senator from Delaware, like the same media market, for 500 years before he ran for office. And, of course, had been, vice president to a black president for 8 years. I don't know. I mean, maybe though she was a woman of color and brought much more energy to the campaign, being from the Bay Area of California, just didn't do a great deal for you in Philadelphia. And even though you're white as white could be, if you were in the neighboring state, Delaware, northern Delaware area is just considered a Philadelphia suburb and bedroom community in many of those areas. Certainly the same media market, and having a 50-year history there, you could see where you might have a different electoral outcome. All right. Yesterday I began reading to you, even though I couldn't pronounce it out loud, the Substack of Yastrzebliansky, which I'm hoping I'm still close to. He, a longtime denizen of the online world, the old school blogosphere, the media, social media platforms, formerly known as Twitter and now Blue Sky, of course. And again, working in the Substack. He had an interesting series of observations in what he said would be his last post-mortem about the election. The one we were able to shoehorn in before having to leave for the day yesterday was the widely shared analysis that what happened, or part of what happened in the American election, was a backlash against incumbency and a backlash against liberal democracy supporting parties versus the weird right-wing fascist supporting parties that, well, somehow was tied to incumbency, even though technically speaking the incumbent wasn't running, but that this had happened across many countries around the world, and that the inflation, post-COVID inflation, had something to do with it, et cetera, et cetera. But then upon closer examination, more granular examination, it turned out, well, no, it wasn't a universally experienced backlash. And it's not, well, nothing is ever really universal, but it wasn't just that there were one or two examples either of things going the exact opposite direction. So maybe this initial analysis wasn't going to hold up in the long term. So that was kind of an interesting observation to make. And we left off basically in reading that, okay, well, what happened to us in the last month is not something typical of what happened to the industrialized countries in the wake of COVID and inflation, as it turns out. That there were counterexamples all over the place, including in Spain and Germany, where their record of the incumbent governments on immigration, for instance, was very different. And perhaps, though, may have been more liberal even than we had here, and yet they did not find themselves out of touch with their voters, which is interesting and probably deserves a second look. Only in America, he continues on, did people end up voting for the triple threat of fascism, the low-life gangster criminality of the New York real estate industry, and invincible stupidity. How did that happen? And now we get into some interesting stuff here. Of course, we've all heard this one. Kamala Harris got close to 7 million fewer votes than Biden did in 2020, and Trump got almost 3 million more than he did 4 years ago. But that's not exactly it, because in the battleground states, the only ones that count in our weird system, she actually did better than Biden. In Wisconsin, Georgia, North Carolina, and Nevada, Trump's victories in the three states that ended up mattering the most, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, were almost as narrow as they were in 2016, around a total of 230,000 votes. Right? Swing those the other way, and who's the genius now? If Harris had won these three, and thus the presidency, she'd still most likely have lost the popular vote, and it is fun to imagine how the Republicans would be screaming to get rid of the Electoral College. That, and time out here for just a second. Trump is like spending time on Truth Social accusing the Democrats of wanting to work hard to get rid of the popular vote as anything meaningful. And it isn't anything meaningful. We still are stuck with the Electoral College. It's just weird. He's now out there accusing Democrats of wanting to do, I don't know what. I mean, I don't even know what he thinks Democrats are up to, but insisting that they're the ones who want to get, who want to stick with the Electoral College, which makes you think, is this something, Republicans have been dependent on the Electoral College in the last couple of elections. As it turns out, Trump won the popular vote in the sense that he got the most votes, but he didn't get, it was still just a plurality. But I've never heard anything along the lines of Democrats being uninterested in the popular vote outcome in determining the presidency. It's just, it doesn't. And they haven't been particularly vocal in the idea of getting rid of the Electoral College. Some progressives have made noises about that. It's just a very weird accusation to make, and thus something that you might want to view as a Republican accusation, which is actually a confession. But yeah, I don't know. It's just a very weird thing. And I mean, it's almost as if somehow Trump was anticipating a valid Democratic attack on the electoral college majority that Trump has been able to cobble together twice. And like, it's almost as if he was anticipating a valid claim of some sort of fraud that Trump was executing in order to cobble together the electoral college votes that he needed to win, and that he was preemptively attacking that because he knew that it was valid. I don't know what the hell he was. What else would motivate Trump's, except, extreme dementia, which is also, a valid possibility. What would motivate Trump to say that Democrats were trying to undermine the importance of the popular vote? It's just not something that has happened. And if I'm looking for an explanation as to why he's babbling, maybe it's a fool's errand and I shouldn't. Anyway, let's stick to what is here on the page. If Harris had won those 3 states, in other words, turned around that 230,000 votes, she would have won the presidency, even if not the popular vote. And it's fun to imagine how Republicans would be screaming to get rid of the Electoral College. But they're not, because he won the Electoral College. But instead, they're still screaming about something. That's what's so weird. It's okay. So it's fun to imagine how Republicans would be screaming to get rid of the Electoral College. And the New York Times would suddenly be darkly concerned about the new president's legitimacy, had it been Harris, in exactly the way that they weren't at all concerned when Republicans won that way, that is to say, losing the popular vote but winning the Electoral College in 2000 and 2016. Now, on to the other interesting stuff. It was another turnout election, like all American elections, in which the big winner was the non-voters. 93 million out of a total voter-eligible population of 245 million, compared to 75 million who actually voted for Harris and just over 77 million voting for Trump. 75 for Harris, 77 for million, 93 million who said, can't be bothered. And the biggest story nationwide was of those 7 million voters that the Democrats lost. On the other hand, from the consultant brain standpoint of campaign strategists focused on the 7 states that mattered to the Electoral College outcome, they really didn't do so badly, just not quite well enough. Though, again, I guess it needs to be said, and this is what people were looking at, right? 81 million votes for Joe Biden. Had Harris done nothing to grow that coalition but turn it out again, 81 million votes would have been a 4 million vote margin over Donald Trump and a huge win. Maybe, unless the Electoral College somehow went the other way regardless. But, and then again, all of this, oh my God, we need to go rogue, we need to raise our own money, we need to meet in the Dunkin' Donuts, would all have been for naught. It would have been a genius strategy that won the most important election of our lifetime. So I guess the real question is, where did those 7 million votes go and why? Right? Okay, so from the consultant brain standpoint of campaign strategists focused on the 7 states that mattered in the Electoral College, they really didn't do so badly, just not quite well enough. The turnout was quite high in those states. It's possible that the low turnout for Harris in other states was mostly because voters realized their votes really mattered even less than usual. Right? So maybe the popular vote total was driven down as people realized, look, there's really only 7 states that matter and I don't live in one of those. What's the damn difference? And it didn't make any difference in terms of those Electoral College votes, in fact, going into the Harris column. They were right. Those voters are right to say my vote apparently doesn't matter all that much. And so, in the end, they ended up creating the narrative of Trump being able to say, see, I won the popular vote as well. Whereas if they had just said, all right, my vote doesn't count very much, but let me go cast it because I just don't want the orange guy running around thinking he won the popular vote. Yeah, that's a big thing, and they didn't do it. All right, so there you have it. Harris, the low turnout for Harris possibly was mostly because voters realized their votes mattered less than usual, and Trump just captured more of that than Harris did. Newly emerging stories in the New York Times suggest that the Trump strategy was a lot more effective than Yastroblansky here. Have I pronounced that wrong again? Yastroblansky, maybe. I hope it's right after all these years. Stories in the New York Times suggest that the Trump strategy was a lot more effective than I imagined it would be. A lot more like the 2016 campaign, in fact, if without whatever assistance they'd had then from Cambridge Analytica and or the late Yevgeny Prigozhin's Internet Research Agency, but everything that Chris Lasivita and Tony Fabrizio had learned from that experience, making their money go as far as possible by targeting their advertising at the narrowest possible set of voters, as identified by Fabrizio's polling. Here's where it gets a little interesting. These were, according to the Times' Shane Goldmacher, the lowest propensity voters, the most genuinely undecided because the least informed about the campaign, mostly young, and I think largely male, and somewhat, though not extremely low income, reachable through ads on streaming services like Max, Tubi, and Roku. Interesting, which provided advertisers with a lot more information than broadcast or cable TV do, right down to the specific individual, where the Harris campaign was stuck with the usual broad geographical targeting. And now a clip from the Times' story that he mentions. In the 7 states, we were talking, this is the Republicans mentioning their strategy. In the 7 states, we were talking to 6.3 million people. They, the Harris campaign, were talking to 44.7 million, explained David Lee, a top pollster for the super PAC Make America Great Again Incorporated. Anyway, now, on its face, you'd be like, great, Democrats are talking to 44.7 million people. The Republicans are only talking to 6.3 million people. We're going to win. They're talking to millions, tens of millions of more people. So you're talking to more people, you're going to win more people, right? Apparently not. Here's where it gets counterintuitive. There's roughly 38 million people that they're hitting, of the 44.7 million that the Harris campaign is talking to. 38 million of those people have already made up their mind. So I don't care how much more money you have than us to spend. You're wasting 85% of your money. Again, this is like high-risk strategy. No, talk to fewer people. Really? Isn't that the opposite of what most campaigns typically try to do? Yes, and here's the reason why. If you're talking to 44.7 million people and 38 million of them have already made up their mind, then yes, you're wasting 85% of your money. That's something you can say after the fact, after you've won. Had 230,000 votes in 3 states gone the other way, everybody would be saying, this guy is a moron. His campaign strategy is to talk to fewer people. That's absolutely upside down and backwards. Why is anybody listening to this guy? Win the vote, though. Oh, my God, he's a genius. Maybe. But he might have a point here somewhere. And our writer tells us, I thought this was a bad population to work on when it was originally reported because they were people obviously not interested in voting. The 6.3 million people that they were speaking to, that the Trump campaign was speaking to in this geographic area, are people who said, I don't care. I don't want to vote. I don't want to know anything about the campaign. Let other people decide it. Don't talk to me. I don't care about politics. Sounds like stupid, right? Not only are you talking to less people, but you're talking to people who are saying, I don't want to hear from you. I don't care about campaigns. So it does sound dumb. But the math of the actual outcome is inescapable. To get the 230,000 or so votes that they needed in order to win the election across these 3 states, to get those 230,000 or so votes, they needed an investment in in order to get those 230,000 votes out of the 6.3 million people they were targeting, they had to have a conversion rate of just under 4%. And that's not so unachievable. Now, in the business world, by the way, if you're going to run the government like a business, etc., in the business world, they'll tell you, well, wait a second, a 4% conversion rate is actually outstanding, remarkable. Maybe it is, in fact, something that I would label as unachievable, or at least not in the main achievable. But then again, in the business world, you're talking about getting people to part with money, as opposed to doing the free act of voting, to which all of them are entitled. You know, it's one thing to get people to open their wallets and give you their money. It's another to say, well, you can vote and it costs you nothing. And in fact, you can do it by mail, and you can do it any time in between now and the beginning of November. So maybe it's different, but maybe it's not. I mean, it may be, well, they did get the 4%, and so they look like geniuses, but in hindsight, had 230,000 votes not materialized, or had they swung the other way, it would have been, no, you've made a fundamental error in judgment here, and that's why you lost. That's what we would be reading about. But then he goes on to say they didn't have so little money to work with as they expected. After all, thanks largely to Elon Musk's gigantic infusion in the last months of probably upwards, and now it's confirmed, upwards of $250 million, reported by Theodore Schleifer and Maggie Haberman. It's now about 275, I think. So while I was laughing at Musk and Charlie Kirk for their hilariously inept efforts at traditional get-out-the-vote activities, and at Trump for spending campaign money on his lawyers, Musk wasn't actually managing much of anything beyond displaying his musky sense of humor. For instance, he secretly funded the RBG PAC. It's really, named for the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, pushing the message to women that Trump really wasn't, as opposed to abortion, as his work to overturn Roe v. Wade would suggest, to the anger of Ginsburg's family. Rather, he, Musk, was quietly bankrolling the approach favored by the professionals, at what you might call levels we've never seen before. So, in fact, it wasn't, I'm going to overrule the professionals and run a rogue campaign the way Elon Musk thinks. That was just the front. In reality, he was pouring $250 million into the professional strategy. It's just that had 230,000 votes gone the other way, the professional strategy would have looked idiotic. It's not really right to claim that one factor explains the whole election, and that's usually true. There are just too many factors. But there is some evidence that this was an important one. One is the fact from the exit polls, which have been bothering me for a month, that Trump won the relatively low-income voters, with incomes between $30,000 and $100,000, unlike in 2016 or 2020, when he'd been the favored candidate of the wealthy, say $100K and up, and was just even with middle income from 50 to 100K, while the under 50K had been solidly Democratic. Obviously, there was a serious amount of fall-off in Trump's support among the wealthy. Maybe mostly the same women frightened and offended by Trump who had made the difference in 2022, but it also makes sense to suppose that some important number of the new voters were the ones targeted by the GOP strategy, like Joe Rogan listeners, disproportionately male, under 34, and unmarried, gamers, and middle income. And many of them were new voters. 8% of the total electorate were voting for the very first time, and Trump won them overwhelmingly, 55 to 44. While I was welcoming the Taylor Swift registrations, nobody was noticing these other people. Then there's the phenomenon of the bullet ballots. Remember, I told you about bullet voting at one point. People who voted only in the presidential race, ignoring all the down ballot races from surrogate judges up to senators, which was briefly the subject of a full-blown conspiracy theory of voting machine manipulation. Where does this come from? PlanetCritical.com. I don't know, which I'm not familiar with. That's where the bullet ballots piece came from, so I'm guessing that that's where this clip comes from. In Arizona, Trump's percentage of bullet ballots totaled 7.2%. In Nevada, 5.5%. In comparison, bullet ballots for Trump in Oregon, Utah, and Idaho, the three states which border Arizona and Nevada, as it turns out, with equally fervent Trump voters, count for less than 0.05% in each state. Oregon, Utah, Idaho, nobody was doing it. Nevada and Arizona, everybody was doing it. The same pattern continues across the other swing states, with an astonishing 11% of votes for Trump in North Carolina being bullet ballots. Critically, only 400,000 votes would be needed to be added in strategic precincts in swing states in order to secure Trump's victory. In each of these swing states, too, the number of votes for Trump and no one else takes the count just over the margin, which necessitates a legal hand recount. That was the conspiracy theory. The leading proponents of the conspiracy theory, Stephen Spoonamore, has since dropped it, but the fact remains interesting. Who are these people? I mean, that is a legitimate question. Are these bullet voters? Were they real? Yes. Why did they do it? I don't know, but it led to a widespread underperformance by down-ballot candidates. No coattails of sorts, really, for Trump, but he doesn't care anyway. Exit polls obviously won't pick them up, but it's not difficult to speculate. They're very much nonpartisan, not concerned with partisan issues, extremely unlikely voters, attracted maybe by the Trump personality cult, maybe by Trump as a smash-everything disruptor, maybe by Trump as a joke on the annoying world of serious people. Exactly the kind of the people that the campaign was targeting for these streaming services ads, in exactly the precincts where they'd make the difference. A conspiracy, in other words, but probably not terribly illegal, though there were certainly very questionable things like Musk's multi-million-dollar fake lottery, things that ought to have been questioned but rarely are, like the question of collaboration between campaigns and super PACs, which would really be over the line if I've got this right. Kind of disgusting, too, in the contempt it shows for democracy. I'd love to see a politics that engages unlikely voters with a sense that they have a civic role to play, to make their voices heard in the councils of the mighty. But this picking up on a tiny subgroup who really don't care as cheaply as you can with the minimum it takes to win the undemocratic electoral college is the opposite of that.
From networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
I mean, an interesting theory, no doubt, and something that needs to be examined afterwards. We've actually reached the end of the article, though, so we'll cram that in there. Time now to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Guess what's up first? Louis DeJoy apparently suffering a bipartisan Senate hearing beatdown. Let's hear more about that next.